They say I killed my husband for love. They're not entirely wrong. My name is Ilara. Once I wore a crown of silver and ruled beside a king I never chose. Now I wear nothing but the weight of what I've done. History will call me traitor, murderer, the queen who destroyed her own kingdom for a man who should have been her enemy. But they will never know the truth of it, the way war can make monsters of good men, and how sometimes the enemy shows you more mercy than your own blood ever could. Let me tell you how a queen falls, not from grace, but from a throne built on lies. The wedding was in autumn. I remember the smell of dying leaves and cold stone. I was 19. King Aldrich was 42, with hands like winter and eyes that never softened, not even when he spoke my name as his wife. He did not marry me for love. He married me because my father controlled the northern passes, because my dowry included 300 knights and a fortress that guarded the only road through the mountains. Our wedding night, he told me my duty: bear sons, stand beside him in the great hall, never question his decisions. He spoke to me the way men speak to horses they've just purchased, firm, final, without room for refusal. I learned quickly that a queen's crown is also a cage. The war began 6 months after our marriage. The southern kingdoms had formed an alliance. They claimed our king had broken treaties, seized lands that weren't his, burned villages and disputed territories. Aldrich called them lies. He called them savages. He said they wanted to destroy everything we'd built, that they envied our strength, our wealth, our power. But I had seen the refugees, families fleeing north with scorched feet and haunted eyes, children who flinched at loud voices, women who would not speak of what they'd seen. I asked Aldrich once if the accusations were true. He struck me across the face so hard I tasted blood. "You are a queen," he said coldly, "not a conscience." I never asked again. The war dragged on. Month after month, our men marched south. Month after month, fewer returned. The great hall filled with widows dressed in black. The throne room echoed with the cries of mothers who had lost their sons. Aldrich grew crueler. His victories were celebrated with executions. His defeats were blamed on cowards and traitors. He hung 3 of his own generals for retreating from an impossible battle. I stood beside him through it all, silent, dutiful, the perfect queen. But at night, alone in my chambers, I wept for the kingdom we were destroying, for the future we were burning, for the version of myself I'd buried beneath the crown. Then the Southern Alliance did something unexpected. They sent an envoy, a request for parley, and they sent him. His name was Cale, commander of the Southern forces, the man our soldiers called the Shadow Blade, the warrior who had won every battle he had ever fought. I expected a monster. I expected a man like Aldrich, carved from cruelty and ambition. Instead, I met someone who looked as tired as I felt. The parley took place in neutral territory, an old temple halfway between our borders, abandoned by priests decades ago. Aldrich brought 50 knights. Cale came with 5. It was a gesture, a risk, a sign of good faith. Aldrich laughed at it. I stood behind my husband's chair while they spoke. That was my place. Behind. Silent. Ornamental. But Cale's eyes found mine across the room. Just once. Just for a moment. And in that glance, I saw something I hadn't seen in years. Recognition. As if he knew exactly what it felt like to be trapped by duty, to serve a cause that slowly devoured your soul. The parley failed. Of course it did. Aldrich had no intention of making peace. He'd only agreed to the meeting to learn the enemy's weaknesses, to see their commander with his own eyes. As we rode away, Aldrich was already planning the ambush, how he would lure Cale into a trap, how he would mount the commander's head on a spike outside our castle walls. "That will break them," he said, smiling. "Kill their hope, and the rest will crumble." I said nothing, but that night I could not sleep. I kept seeing Cale's face, the sadness in his eyes, the weight he carried, just like me. Two people drowning on opposite sides of a war. The ambush was set for the next full moon. Aldrich's plan was perfect, brutal, efficient. I told myself I would do nothing. I was a queen. My loyalty was to my husband, my kingdom, my crown. But loyalty is a strange thing. It demands your obedience. It does not ask for your heart. 3 nights before the ambush, I did something unforgivable. I rode out alone, in the dark, with my hood pulled low. I crossed into enemy territory, and I found him. Cale was camped in the forest with a small unit, no banners, no ceremony, just soldiers sitting around a dying fire, too exhausted to even sing. When I stepped into the firelight, 20 swords were drawn in an instant. But Cale raised his hand. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he dismissed his men. We stood alone in the darkness between the trees, the enemy commander and the enemy queen. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly. "I know. If your husband finds out, he'll kill me." Cale studied my face, this man I barely knew, this enemy I was supposed to hate. "Then you why I'm coming." I could have said duty, I could have said mercy, I could have lied. Instead, I told the truth. Because in 3 days, he's going to kill you, and I realized I couldn't let that happen. I told him everything, the location of the trap, the number of soldiers, the exact route Aldrich would use. Cale listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was silent for a long time. "You've just betrayed your own kingdom," he said softly. "I know. Why?" I looked into his eyes, this man I barely knew, this enemy I was supposed to hate. Because this war is wrong, because Aldrich is destroying everything he touches, because someone has to stop him. Cale stepped closer. "And you think I'm that someone. I think you're the only one who might care more than just victory." The words hung between us like a confession, like a dare, like the beginning of something that could never be undone. He reached out slowly and touched my face, just once, gentle as prayer. "You're going to regret this," he whispered. "I already do." But neither of us stepped away. I should have gone back that night. I should have ridden home and pretended it never happened. Instead, I stayed until dawn. We talked the way 2 prisoners might speak through a wall, about everything except the war, about the lives we had before the crowns and the battles, about the people we used to be before duty buried us alive. When the sun began to rise, Cale walked me to the edge of the forest. "If we meet again," he said, "it will be on a battlefield. I know. He won't be able to protect you. I'm not asking you to." He looked at me one last time, and then he said something that shattered what was left of my resolve. "You deserve better than him, Alara. You deserve better than all of this." No one had said my name like that in years, like I was a person, not a title. I rode home in the gray morning light, knowing I had just crossed a line I could never uncross. The ambush failed. Cale's forces were gone before Aldrich's men arrived. The trap closed on nothing but empty air and abandoned fires. Aldrich was furious. He executed the scouts for incompetence. He doubled the patrols. He sent spies into every village, searching for traitors. And he watched me. Not openly, not obviously, but I felt his eyes on me in the great hall, felt his suspicion like a knife against my throat. I played my part perfectly, the concerned wife, the loyal queen. I asked no questions, expressed no opinions. I became invisible. But at night I lay awake, remembering Cale's voice, the way he looked at me like I mattered, like I was more than just a vessel for someone else's ambition. I told myself it meant nothing, a moment of weakness, a mistake I would never repeat. Then the letters began. They came secretly, delivered by a kitchen girl who asked no questions, small pieces of parchment, unmarked, hidden in loaves of bread, or tucked beneath my pillow. Cale's words were careful, never treasonous, never explicit, but they spoke to the part of me I'd buried, the part that remembered what it felt like to be human. He wrote about the war, about his doubts, about the men he'd lost and the nights he couldn't sleep, about the impossible choices commanders make when every decision costs lives. He wrote like someone who understood the weight of a crown, the loneliness of power, the terrible space between duty and conscience. And slowly, letter by letter, I fell in love with the enemy. We met 3 more times over the next months, always in secret, always in the dead of night, in abandoned watchtowers and forgotten clearings where no one would think to look. We never touched beyond that first gentle brush of his hand. We never kissed. We never spoke of love aloud. But it was there, in every glance, every silence, every moment we chose to stay instead of run. Cale told me about his family, a sister who died in Aldrich's first assault, a father who'd begged him not to take command, knowing it would destroy him. I told him about the girl I'd been before the crown, the one who wanted to heal people, not rule them, who believed kingdoms could be built on something other than blood. "You still believe that," Cale said once. "I can see it in you." Believing doesn't change anything. No, but it means you haven't given up. He made me feel dangerous, not because he was the enemy, but because he made me remember who I could have been, who I still wanted to be, and that was more threatening than any army. The end began in winter. Aldrich's forces were losing ground. The Southern Alliance had pushed north, reclaiming territory, liberating towns. Desperation made Aldrich monstrous. He ordered villages burned to deny the enemy supplies. He executed prisoners publicly to terrorize the population. He sent children to fight battles grown men were losing. The kingdom was dying, and Aldrich refused to see it. I tried once more to speak reason. I suggested peace terms, negotiations, a way to end the bloodshed before there was nothing left to rule. He didn't hit me this time. He did something worse. He smiled. "You've changed, Alara. You used to understand duty. Now you sound like the enemy." My blood went cold. "I only want what's best for the kingdom. Do you?" His eyes were ice. "Or do you want what's best for yourself?" He knew. Somehow he knew. That night, I found the kitchen girl who'd been delivering the letters. She was hanging from the castle walls, her body swaying in the winter wind. And I understood. Aldrich hadn't confronted me because he wanted to see how far I would go. He wanted proof, evidence, a reason to destroy me publicly. I had 2 choices, run or finish what I'd started. I chose treason. I sent one final message to KL, a detailed account of Aldrich's weaknesses, the castle's defenses, the locations of supply routes, the names of generals who were losing faith, everything he needed to end the war. And then I went to my husband's chambers. Aldrich was alone, studying maps by candlelight, planning his next atrocity. He looked up when I entered, unsurprised, as if he'd been expecting me. "Come to confess?" he asked coldly. "No," I said. "I've come to finish this." I had poison in my sleeve, a small vial, easy to hide, fast-acting, painless if mercy matters. But when I looked at him, sitting there in his arrogance, his cruelty, his absolute certainty that he was right, I couldn't do it. Not because I loved him, but because killing him wouldn't change anything. The war would continue. Another man would take the throne. The cycle would repeat. So I did something worse. I told him the truth. I told him about KL, about the letters, about the nights I'd crossed enemy lines, about every piece of intelligence I'd shared. I told him I'd betrayed the kingdom, that the enemy knew everything, that the war was already lost. I expected rage, violence. I expected him to kill me where I stood. Instead, he laughed. Not a cruel laugh, a broken one, the sound of a man who'd finally lost. "I knew it," he said quietly. "I've known for months." My heart stopped. "Then why?" "Because I wanted to see if you would choose me, just once. I wanted to see if you would be loyal." He looked at me with something almost like grief. "But you were never mine, were you? From the very first day, you were never mine." He stood slowly, walked to the window, looked out at the kingdom he'd destroyed in the name of pride. "You should have just killed me, Alara. It would have been kinder." Then he drew his own sword. I don't know if it was suicide or surrender. I don't know if he meant to fall on his blade or simply couldn't bear to live with what he'd become. But King Aldrich died that night, and I became a widow and a traitor and a queen without a kingdom. The castle fell 3 days later. Kael's forces took it without a battle. The gates opened from the inside. The soldiers laid down their weapons. No one wanted to die for a dead king's pride. I expected to be executed, hanged, as a traitor, an example to anyone who might think to betray their crown. Instead, Kael came to my chambers, alone, unarmed. We looked at each other across the room where I'd spent so many nights alone, where I'd read his letters by candlelight, where I'd chosen him over everything I was supposed to be. "You're free," he said quietly. "You can go wherever you want. I'll make sure you're protected." "I don't want protection." "Then what do you want?" I wanted to say love. I wanted to say him. I wanted to pretend we could have a life together after everything we'd done. But I knew the truth. "I want to be forgotten," I whispered. History remembers me as the queen who betrayed her kingdom, the woman who loved the enemy, the traitor who opened the gates. They don't remember Aldrich's cruelty. They don't remember the villages he burned, or the children he sent to die. They don't remember that the kingdom was already falling long before I helped it collapse. They only remember that I chose love over duty, that I put one man above an entire realm. And maybe they're right. Maybe I am exactly what they say. But on the nights when I can't sleep, when the weight of what I've done presses down like a stone, I remember Kael's face in the firelight, the way he made me feel human again, the way he reminded me that beneath the crown, beneath the duty, beneath the war, I was still just a girl who wanted to matter. I never saw him again after that night. He offered me a new life, a place in the South, a future. I refused. Because some loves aren't meant to be lived. Some loves are meant to break you, to change you, to show you what you're willing to sacrifice when you finally find something worth dying for. I live in a small village now, far from castles and crowns and thrones. No one knows my name. No one remembers my face. But sometimes, on winter nights, when the wind sounds like a distant army, I think about the choice I made, the kingdom I betrayed, the enemy I loved. And I wonder if he thinks of me too, if he remembers the queen who fell, if he knows that even now, even after everything, I would make the same choice again. Because that's what love is, not the pretty stories, not the happy endings. Love is the thing that makes you brave enough to destroy yourself for someone else's chance at living. And I loved him. God help me, I loved him.